Thank you for joining us. Thank you, thank you. I'd like to extend a genuine, heartfelt welcome to each one of you here with us live and those who will be watching the playback. Your presence and interest in such a critical topic inspire us to keep pushing forward in our solidarity and on our advocacy. So first, some housekeeping. During this event, with the ethos of respect and understanding that defines our community, I encourage all of us, including myself, to practice empathy and mindfulness towards each other's perspectives. Despite our best intentions, we might stumble upon language or ideas that could unknowingly cause hurt or be considered problematic. But it's really in these moments that our commitment to learn and grow shines brightest. We're here not just to share knowledge, but to foster a space where learning means doing better together. So some quick and exciting developments to announce for our APEX community members. Our Slack channel has been updated and revitalized. So by staying active on the channel, you won't miss out on the incredible opportunities and connections that continuously emerge for us. Case in point, please know that all members now have access to free one-on-one small group healing and wellness sessions with our resident wellness coach, Dominique Sade. We recognize the imperative of mental and emotional wellness in our advocacy work. So it's our gift to you, and you'll find the link to her schedule in our chat momentarily. Eubanks will drop that for you. And for anyone and everyone seeking resources beyond what we covered today in this session, the PDF version of APEX's Activism Starter Guide for BIPOC, the Animal Activism Starter Guide, is now available for free download. So you'll find that link in our chat or through our website. This guide that we created is a labor of love from our team, and we're confident it'll serve as a valuable tool for everyone. And should you require any bulk orders, don't hesitate to email us at info@apexadvocacy.org. Looking ahead, last announcement, the APEX team is excited that we'll be attending the Animal Vegan Advocacy Summit, AVA, in Alexandria, Washington, D.C. next month. Among the highlights, on Thursday, May 16th from 11 to noon, you can join us for a BIPOC meetup we'll be co-hosting alongside Unity Collective and Veggie Mijas. On Friday, May 17th, we're organizing a collective action event for Palestinian solidarity, so stay tuned. Those details will be announced in the coming week or so. And finally, on Saturday, May 18th, from 9:30 a.m. to 10:30, you have to wake on up and don't miss APEX's panel presentation, Integrative Activism for Collective Liberation, the indispensable role of fostering BIPOC allyship towards animal liberation. It's a mouthful. So team members, Chris, Akbar, and myself will be presenting. So represent and show up, please. So now I'll take a moment to share my screen with you and get rolling.
And quickly, Yvette, I'm going to add one other person as a administrator, just FYI.
Okay. That sounds good. Actually, hold on one sec. Where'd my little presentation go? All right, there we are. And we got to share our screen. Give me one moment. Technical things ain't my thing, but we're going to get it. Here we go. Share my screen. Presentation. Serve it up. Share. Not share. We want to present. All right, we're good. All right, hopefully you see before you the title of this presentation, Unified Resistance, the Role of Animal Liberation and Decolonial Activism. My name is Yvette Baker, Director of Activism at APEX Advocacy. I am an Afro-Indigenous writer and lifelong advocate for social justice with a focus leaning into animal liberation for the past 9 years. I present before you not as an infallible expert, but as someone committed to the continuous process of learning and unlearning. In our time together, I hope to be both a teacher and student, eager to absorb and reflect on your insights and experiences as well. So with this in mind, let's go. APEX Advocacy, some of you may be new to us. Our goal is to create a larger community of BIPOC advocates internationally, which we're doing, who fight for animals. We're dedicated to promoting animal liberation while respecting and integrating cultural diversity and social justice principles. Although we define ourselves as an anti-speciesist vegan organization, APEX does not treat veganism as a prerequisite to fight against animal industries. We support BIPOC communities regardless of whether they are vegan or not. So today's objective is to explore and understand the interconnectedness of animal liberation with decolonial activism, challenging prevailing misconceptions and fostering solidarity. Let's move in. All right, so we're going to park here for a minute. I have some things to say. This intersection challenge, the fight for animal liberation, is inseparable from decolonial activism. This is the pivotal concept that forms the foundation of our dialogue today. The idea that the fight for animal liberation is inseparably intertwined with decolonial activism. So, by the way, when I refer to indigeneity for this session, I mean descendants of the peoples who inhabited the Americas, the Pacific, parts of Asia, and Africa prior to European colonization. So, why does this matter? Exploring these intersections reveals paths to build bridges with other movements, garners more support for animal liberation efforts, and moves us further down the path toward collective liberation where we all matter. So at first glance, these struggles may appear completely distinct, each with their own history, narratives, and goals. But when we examine closer, it's our connections and intersections that unveil powerful opportunities for collaboration and mutual support. It opens a dialogue and a space where empathy, understanding, and solidarity can flourish. And these bridges aren't just metaphors, they're real paths towards enhancing our collective efforts, bringing diverse voices and perspectives together in a unified call for justice. So by intertwining our support for animal liberation with broader decolonial efforts, we tap into a much larger pool of allies and advocates, right? And this synergy amplifies our message, extending its reach and impact far beyond what we might achieve in isolation. It's about recognizing our fight is part of a bigger struggle against many forms of oppression that plague our world. Now, I know it's tough for many in the vegan community to think about aiming for anything less than a total ethics shift where everyone agrees to stop harming animals right away. But history shows us that waiting for this big moral awakening is not only unrealistic, but it's actually slowed us down. So while we see more vegan products and options than ever, this growth is more about diversifying portfolios and vegan branded capitalist interests than a real shift in society's ethics or having saved any animals. Also, when we look at the numbers, vegans often get lumped with vegetarians under broad definitions, which can mislead us about how many of us there really are. So despite optimistic counts, our movement isn't really growing fast enough. We're still just around 1 to 3% of the population. So I'm asserting that real change won't come from everyone suddenly agreeing with us. Instead, we need to focus on breaking down the systems that allow animal exploitation bit by bit, just like in anti-racism work. It's not about changing one person at a time, but about changing policies and laws and having allies in key places. And we also need to recognize how fighting animal exploitation ties into the broader battles against all forms of oppression. And we will not get far if we ignore how these issues connect or if we act like we have all the answers. Furthermore, envisioning vegans as moral leaders in broader discussions of injustice requires us to acknowledge and address how deeply intertwined animal exploitation is with the very speciesism we aim to dismantle. Rewind that, YouTube. It's time we put our egos aside, truly join hands with others and learn from them. Real progress comes from compromise, dialogue, and building wide range alliances. By joining forces with other movements, we can be part of a broader push for freedom for everyone. All right, we made it out. Here we go. So dispelling misconceptions about veganism. Even though we're about to jump around and touch on a lot of different issues today, I would argue that right here at the foundation of what is, this is at the foundation of what we're doing, what we're standing for, and what we mean when we say vegan is where we should always return when we're faced with discomfort, especially the ideas of change and compromise to be effective. So It's crucial to understand that veganism has never been about upholding an unattainable moral purity. Instead, it's been a socio-political movement and philosophy deeply ingrained with principles of anti-oppression, compassion, harm reduction, and justice. We'll come across a lot of folks hell-bent on throwing in our faces one of the many renditions of the Vegan Society version of the definition, and that's okay, because no matter how many people come along and trim and pick their definition, the founders actually wrote extensively about veganism as encompassing a philosophy that excludes all forms of exploitation against animals or humans, and that it had the potential to be the greatest peace movement of all time. So now, to fully hop on board with what we're discussing today, let's quickly define decoloniality, drawing from the William and Mary's Decolonizing Humanities Project, because I like their definition, a way for us to relearn the knowledge, and I want to add, and practices that have been pushed aside, forgotten, buried, or discarded by the forces of modernity, settler colonialism, and racial capitalism. They also extrapolate that decoloniality is not a means to reject the modern era. It is rather a way to explore colonization, settler colonialism, racial capitalism, modernity, and most importantly, neoliberalism and necro-capitalism, and the ways in which they have displaced an array of modes of living, thinking, and being in our natural world. So immediately, connection surfaces between the ethos of veganism and the essence of decoloniality, a vegan cause to eradicate the systematic exploitation and immense suffering of inherent industrial animal agriculture, which subjugates billions of land animals, chickens, cows, pigs, and farms trillions of fish, is intrinsically linked to dismantling the mechanisms of colonization. This system, introduced in North America during European colonization, served as a primary tool to displace indigenous peoples from their lands, seizing control over the food system, eroding food sovereignty, and consolidating wealth through land acquisition. So in the APEX starter guide I mentioned earlier, we talk about divesting from food imperialism and colonialism as one of the reasons that people of color especially do and shall continue to get involved in animal activism. So we've written, animal agriculture was the perfect tool for European settlers to colonize and control the globe. Indigenous communities were subjected to rampant abuse from colonists who adopted a similar approach to managing quote unquote livestock as they did with those ultimately enslaved: branding, whip cracking, confinement, and sometimes death. This system of slave management was closely modeled on the non-human animal exploitation practices with indigenous peoples as the new commodities to be bought and sold. The commodification and exploitation of indigenous peoples was later extended to African peoples who were forcibly brought to North America in the late 1600s. Indigenous communities then provided a framework for the ruthless treatment of enslaved Africans that would become known as plantation slavery, relying on similar methods of brutalization. And our friend and technical writer, journalist, lecturer, digital media researcher, Christopher Sebastian, I have a beautiful quote from him. He says, "When we look back across our history, racism and speciesism are two systems that really do inform upon one another in a particularly insidious way." I think that quote is super powerful. So moving down here, let's see. So with this systematic animal exploitation, immense cruelty, and commodification of life, animals were not only a blueprint for the kind of exploitation that eventually fell onto humans in the physical expression of violence and oppression, but they were the blueprint for a shift in an ideological sense. Some pre-colonial communities practiced forms of slavery or captured prisoners of war, but these practices varied widely and were not universal. So what ensued was the concept of dehumanization and ideologies of racial superiority and an institutionalization of oppression to legitimize domination on an incomparable scale than with pre-colonial conflicts. And this was an economic / power grab exploitation that laid the ground for modern global capitalism. So the act of reclaiming our food systems from the clutches of industrial animal agriculture echoes the broader decolonial fight for land, autonomy, and the restoration of indigenous modes of living, thinking, and being in harmony with our natural world. So, of course, exploring the overall misconception that veganism is inherently anti-indigenous, we can debunk that. And understanding and correcting misconceptions is crucial in building inclusive movements. We will not move forward while advocating alone. All right, so food allergies and vegan substitutes. Misconception on the softer side, vegan diets rely heavily on foods that are common allergens. On the most absurd end, we hear things like 5 of the top 10 most common food allergies are the top 5 most common vegan substitutes, which this is seemingly futile on account of being so ridiculous and debunkable with a moments of research, but there is a point here. The reality check, firstly, fortified by clinical data, allergic reaction case studies, and food safety reports from authoritative bodies like the FDA and the EFSA, confirms the top 10 allergens to include milk, eggs, fish, shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soybeans, sesame, and mustard. And a plant-based diet inherently eliminates some of those, but more importantly, it offers a much wider range of alternatives to common allergens than folks who eat the same 3 to 5 types of animal bodies might realize, which just really emphasizes the adaptability and inclusivity of a plant-based diet, and that it's not a one-size-fits-all. And while it's easy to counter the common misconception about plant-based diets and food allergies with a just eat something else and a quick reference to the 20,000 edible plants and vegan substitute, such a response, albeit factual, it skirts the deeper systematic issues at play. To suggest eating something else without acknowledging the obstacles many face in accessing a variety of plant-based foods would be to overlook the significant barriers erected by our current food systems. This system exhibits a stark disparity in the distribution of and access to nutritious, allergen-free vegan options, often as a result of food apartheid, economic constraints, and the monopolization of agriculture by monoculture practices that threaten biodiversity. Therefore, our mission should extend beyond promoting plant-based eating as a dietary choice and encompass advocating for a comprehensive overhaul of how food is produced, distributed, and consumed. We can support local agriculture, champion organic and permaculture farming methods, and demand policies that ensure equitable access to plant-based foods. Then we can address the root causes of these disparities. Let's move on. So the notion here, child labor in food production. This notion not only misrepresents veganism's core philosophy, grounded on the principle of causing the least harm possible, but also overlooks the broader reality of labor exploitation across various sectors, including those not at all associated with plant-based diets, such as the fishing industry. But within our movement, there is significant room for growth concerning our awareness and action against human exploitation within the food industry. Ethical intersectional veganism, we'll call it, strides beyond the basic tenets of diet and to advocate for fair labor practices across all food production tiers, stressing ethical consumption choices that honor and protect workers' rights. But to claim our diets as cruelty-free while neglecting the exploitation rampant in industries like cocoa, coffee, and bananas is not only counterproductive, but undermines the credibility of our advocacy. It presents us as selective in our compassion, thereby diminishing the seriousness with which our movement is received. So our broader perspective is not merely about advocating for animal liberation, but promoting a holistic approach to activism that embraces human rights. This approach inherently ties into decolonial efforts, recognizing and challenging the lingering effects of colonialism that manifest in modern day agricultural practices, which prioritize profit over people and the planet. The colonization of food systems has led to a global economy that often disregards indigenous rights, labor rights, and environmental sustainability. So again, this we see the importance of food system advocacy as integral to vegan advocacy by confirming and transforming the food system that exploits both humans and non-humans for profit. We not only challenge the mechanisms of exploitation, but also reclaim a decolonial ethos that respects all life and we rekindle a way of being that precedes colonialist imposition. Woo! Chewing my words here, but we're moving through it. So, unjust labor practices and vegan products. So for the unjust labor practices, very much the same sentiments and important as the last slide, advocating for transparency and fairness in the production of vegan-friendly goods and encouraging support for brands and companies that prioritize ethical practices is imperative. But also, it's crucial to scrutinize labor practices and the production of vegan-friendly goods. We also got to recognize that industries involving animal exploitation often subject workers to some of the most grievous conditions imaginable. The inherent unpleasantness and psychological toll on those workers in slaughterhouses, where the act of taking life daily is routine, or the risks faced by workers in the leather industry, where exposure to toxic chemicals used in processing animal hides into fabric is commonplace, and the dangers faced by fishermen amid increasingly precarious conditions at sea, to work in dairy farms who are often exposed to very hazardous environments without adequate protection or fair compensation. It all should be considered, right? This is not a vegan issue. So a broader look, these unjust conditions persist primarily because in a capitalist system, productivity is prioritized above all, enabling the breeding, exploitation, and suffering of countless animals on an unimaginable scale. So improved treatment of workers and a shift away from prioritizing sheer output over ethical consumption could significantly reduce the number of animals being subjected to such conditions. Undoubtedly, valuing the well-being of non-humans and humans is the wiser approach, where we could begin to dismantle the systems that perpetuate exploitation on such a vast scale and move us closer to a world where animals are not seen as mere commodities at all. We hope, yeah? All right. Are we in the right place? Yes. So superfoods and staple crop accessibility. I'm sure we've all heard this maybe a trillion times. It's gonna do a time check. There we go. In addressing the misconception that the vegan demand for plant-based superfoods deprives local populations of their staple foods, on a basic reality check level, the assertion that vegans, who again make up approximately 1 or 2% of the global population, are singularly deriving an extraordinary demand on any one food item, such as quinoa or avocados, grossly simplifies and a completely complex issue and misrepresents it at that. So as someone who did take time to do a rich amount of global food system research, it's crucial to understand the complexity and nuance that underpin these topics. The misconception here insinuates that we buy, they suffer, which is far from a complete illustration, but it is rooted in truth. As once stated by a Chilean activist, in order to send good avocados to Europeans, we end up drinking water with shit in it. We find ourselves having to choose between cooking and washing, going to the bathroom in holes in the ground or in plastic bags, while big agribusinesses earn more and more. But even in the cases or the specific goods where this is more or less the stage at which local farmers or producers find themselves, the foundational pieces to these injustices are intentional planning and strategic marketing designed to use local populations as expendable resources made possible by corporatized, largely consolidated agribusiness and or violent, corrupt organizations, local organizations in those areas. So there's that, but we are as a community often falling short in the oversight or in the oversimplified advocacy, I should say, of just eat vegan and eat your ethics, because this rhetoric, while well-intended, misses the mark by not fully engaging with the broader implications of our food system and inadvertently fosters a lack of solidarity with movements addressing systemic oppression and environmental justice. And consider the ubiquity of avocado toast in both vegan and non-vegan restaurants alike. It's emblematic of a broader trend that transcends dietary labels, yet the criticism falls disproportionately on the vegan community, painting a picture of a diet that is out of touch with ethical consumption beyond animal rights. And of course, this dichotomy reflects a larger, deeper issue of our collective failure to critically engage where our food comes from and the systemic oppression embedded in our food system. So some traceability, by the way, is at some points completely impossible. So this, again, is a very nuanced, complicated issue. But if we educate ourselves, we are all the better for it. Food apartheid and accessibility issues, another misconception I wanted to highlight, but seeing as we make clear the need to support food justice efforts, especially the issues surrounding inaccessibility disproportionately affecting Black, Brown, and low-income communities, I'll just say that food apartheid doesn't make veganism less accessible. Your values are your values, but it might make plant-based eating more difficult or not practicable. So, which is another very strong reason for us to stop centering our movement around food and lifestyle. So anyone who can't live up to consuming all the things on our vegan approved grocery list is going to feel like they just can't do this. And that's certainly not the case, as we know there are many other ways to be in solidarity with other animals if dietary changes aren't immediately possible. All right. All right. Fast food and lack of vegan options. So the misconception that people without time to meal prep rely on fast food, which lack vegan options, it overlooks a critical shift, firstly, in our food landscape. There has been an emergence of vegan capitalism that has catalyzed revamped menus within fast food chains, driving a significant increase in plant-based offerings. But furthermore, this argument that the reliance on fast food due to time constraints makes plant-based eating less accessible mirrors a misunderstanding of dietary adaptation. So just as folks learn to quickly prepare meals with non-vegan ingredients, the same principles apply to vegan-friendly foods. The notion of no time is a universal challenge transcending dietary preferences. So plant-based eating, much like any diet, comes with its own set of quick, easy to prepare options that fit seamlessly into busy lifestyles. So the empowering choice, of course, learn about food system inequity and its deep connections to anti-Black systemic racism, understand that food justice work is essential for to veganism. So I've said that 100 times, and it's because I mean it. Health conditions and diet restrictions. So this misconception comes from those who are under the impression that there's something inherent in animal flesh that can't be found in plant-based diets. There's a lack of critical thought about why that is. Again, vegans with only around 1%, that there's a huge market for nutritional supplements, for example, and percentages of people much higher than 1% who are B12 deficient out there, or calcium deficient, or iron deficient. Cows are supplemented with B12 vitamins, and cows exploited to produce dairy don't make calcium. They eat grass for that. Plant-based dieters can eat B12 supplements or fortified foods, or eat green leafy vegetables for calcium, cutting out the need for the middleman, the middle moo. I had to. Also, nutrient absorption levels are often talked about. So calcium in milk is 32% absorbable, with Brussels sprouts at 64%. So the more you know, right? This is important because we want to be able to acknowledge the need for personalized dietary approaches while promoting veganism. Even if we have all the debunking information, we don't serve our community any justice. We don't make any allies when we are what I say, debunking to slam dunk, right? This is real for some folks, others use it and exploit it as an excuse, but the best that we can do and show up as advocates is use our inclusivity model until somebody's ready to stop, with the BS. Veganism as an ethical ethos, I've written here, does not necessitate achieving perfection or conquering beyond what is possible and practicable. Super important. All right, so cultural insensitivity and inaccessibility. I get this one a lot. Veganism disregards other cultures, dietary practices, and/or abilities to adhere to a vegan lifestyle. This one's very easy to refute, thanks to so many wonderful food and recipe creators from all across the globe who make it their full-time mission to show how anyone's cultural foods have plant-based adaptations. But one important thing to note is the powerful movement of people of color shifting and decolonizing to get closer to their roots, which is leading so many of us back to plant-centered diets. Many tend to think that these kale smoothies and quinoa salads are innovations of modern white food bloggers, but they're really just the latest iterations of a global time-honored tradition and wisdom to be plant-centered, with particularly deep roots in the global South. Even the idea of the imitation meats isn't exclusive to the modern Western innovation. Both seitan and tofu have their roots in China many centuries ago. So despite the prevalent belief that our traditional cultural foods do not include plant-based items, the reality is that most of our cultural cuisines and foodways are abundant in a variety of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, and whole grains. And embracing a plant-based diet is not only an avenue for allyship with other animals, but an improvement of our nutritional health. It's also a way of preserving cultural identity and stewardship over the environment that so many traditional societies held with respect by relying on nature's bounty alone to nourish them. So again, the decolonial connection there. Veganism and classism. So veganism is classist and inaccessible to low-income communities. The reality is that veganism at its core is about making ethical choices within one's means. Many staples of a plant-based diet are affordable and accessible. But can vegans or vegan activism be weaponized as classes? Absolutely. When we overlook food deserts and assume access to whole foods, ignore economic constraints, neglect socioeconomic diversity in our messaging, we promote expensive quote unquote superfoods, we overemphasize organic only, we glamorize expensive vegan fashion, and so on and so forth. The systemic solutions to this, or what we can do on a social level, of course, is not do that. We cannot do those things. But on a systemic level, addressing economic barriers to healthy food options, food apartheid, getting involved in food justice work, advocating for policies that ensure food justice for all, supporting your local community with mutual aid efforts. All of that is super important. All right. Western agricultural, sorry, my screen blocked a little bit, but it's Western agricultural practices, I believe. Is that what it says? Yeah, practices. All right, good. So the vegan diets drive unsustainable land clearing, excessive water use, and monoculture farming. This is another very, very prevalent anti-vegan sentiment. The facts are laid out here. We should know them. We should be able to use them. Again, not to slam dunk on anybody, but this is really important information that vegans should know, that is backed up by all the peer review science meta-analyses that you could ever want. So plant-based diets require less land and water than diets centered around animal agriculture. One, the most intensively cultivated croplands are used for domesticated non-human animal feed, with 80% of all corn and soy worldwide grown specifically for non-human animals exploited on farms. And three, 50% of all habitable land on the planet is used for agriculture, 83% of which is used for animal agriculture and fish farming. So these stats I got verified by ecologist and environmental researcher Nicholas Carter. I highly suggest looking into his work. What I didn't fit into this slide is that facing the environmental impacts of climate change and the wounded state of our ecosystem, it's dire that we expand our notions of what it would take for Black and brown people to achieve food sovereignty, right? And also many Black and indigenous peoples and organizations, they're actually already organizing with the understanding either that food systems must be heavily plant-centered, or that exploiting animals for food isn't feasible for our planet in any way. So we just have to make sure that we're aware and that we can align ourselves with these organizations. Again, about Nicholas Carter, I highly suggest looking into the work and research, especially for his comprehensive overview of why regenerative agriculture based in animal use is not scalable with our population size, our growth size, nor able to be sustained in a logical or environmental sense without a heavy reduction in meat consumption. So we've all seen a ton of regenerative agriculture, which could be plant-based, by the way, but in an animal-based sense, we've heard enough. We've heard so much. And we just need to educate ourselves because, again, the science lands on, quote unquote, our side. All right. Exploited agricultural workers. This misconception, the exploited labor that makes a vegan diet possible, is often overlooked. So it's usually stated a lot less kindly than that. I sort of paraphrase, but we just got to actually do this. We got to actually care, you know. And this is aligning with how this is aligning with decolonial efforts, prioritizing people over profit and sacrificing convenience for mindfulness of societal and environmental ramifications is reclaiming a decolonial ethos. And veganism involves recognizing and combating exploitative labor practices and all agricultural practices, advocating for the rights and fair treatment for all workers. Like I said, we just have to show up for this. We can familiarize ourselves with the work of Food Empowerment Project, which I love, and linking the animal liberation with labor rights to fight exploitation across the board. That is their work, and it is fantastic. We should all be involved. So veganism as white colonized thought. So veganism is too often misconstrued as a product of white colonized thinking, but actually veganism challenges the colonial narratives by asserting a worldview in which humans and animals coexist with mutual respect and understanding. So it fundamentally embodies the principles of nonviolence and compassion, transcending cultural, racial, and geographic boundaries. So this misconception overlooks the essence of veganism as an ethical stance that advocates for the well-being of all sentient beings and aligning closely with the decolonial endeavor of challenging and dismantling unjust hierarchies. So a bit of a gotcha, but central to rectifying this misunderstanding is the recognition of veganism's deep-rooted connections to various indigenous and non-Western cultures, which have long embraced respectful, harmonious relationships with other animals, viewing them not as soulless entities, but as fellow beings with intrinsic value. And the oldest records of non-violence towards animals, that ethos goes back 3,000 years in ancient India, and also in nonviolent ethics in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. So another point of mention, Margaret Robinson. Margaret Robinson is a modern indigenous scholar whose work on veganism, particularly within indigenous contexts, further illustrates the alignment of vegan principles with decolonial efforts. She advocates for a form of veganism that is informed by a Mi'kmaq traditions, emphasizing the importance of viewing animals as relatives rather than resources. And her research really underscores the importance of diversity within the vegan movement, showcasing how vegan practices can be integrated with cultural and spiritual beliefs that honor the interconnectedness of all life. So to show true diversity, to show the world our true diversity of our community, and to make decolonial practices at the heart of what we do, we can't just surface level feature this stuff. And we can shake off the idea that veganism is exclusive, even if the modern iterations of the movement have been popularized by white British thinkers. The core principles of veganism resonates with and are reflected in the values and principles of indigenous and other marginalized cultures around the world. It's so weird that I can't see anybody, but I'm pressing on. Beyond appropriation. Okay, this is a fun one. So I'll first say that the non-vegan refusal to make tangible ethical sacrifices, such as reducing animal products consumption, supporting sustainable practices, and advocating for policies that protect earth, waters, and biodiversity. A refusal of that is not in solidarity with indigenous communities. In fact, it undermines the very principles of respect and coexistence that are crucial to both veganism and indigenous traditions. Non-vegans claim to stand in solidarity with indigenous peoples while simultaneously engaging in behaviors that contribute to global environmental crises, affecting not just animals, but the lands and waters that indigenous communities have historically protected and continue to defend. So advocating for or against animal liberation can be done without appropriating or misrepresenting indigenous cultures. And it becomes easily apparent when commitment doesn't extend beyond mere activism. We should embody respect and understanding for diverse cultural practices, aligning our efforts with broader decolonial goals. And this means recognizing the nuanced realities of indigenous communities whose practices may include hunting or fishing, and not as exploitation, but as embedded sustainability or survival. It's fundamentally disingenuous and counterproductive to impose Western ideologies of harm reduction on communities in contexts vastly different from our own, without acknowledging the complex interplay of culture, necessity, and environmental stewardship inherent in these practices. I know we're going to hate it as vegans. Oh, the vegan's going to hate on me listening to this. But such an approach not only risks infringing upon the sovereignty and rights of indigenous peoples, but also overlooks the critical importance of addressing the environmental degradation and suffering perpetuated by our own societies. So we as vegans should advocate for indigenous practices that are integral to cultural identity and survival. Our activism can focus on the systemic changes that we can affect within our own societies, to reduce harm and suffering. And by doing so, we acknowledge our interconnectedness and our shared responsibility to protect our planet and all its inhabitants. This approach not only honors the diversity and cultural practices related to animal use, but aligns with a decolonial framework, promoting mutual respect, understanding, and collective action towards a more just world. Woo! How are we on time? Okay, good. We're getting through it. I'm gonna go to the Q&A shortly. So, building bridges toward collective liberation here. Our shared struggle is highlighting the interconnectedness of our fights against oppression and the importance of solidarity across movements for a just and equitable world, right? That's the goal. I've listed some tools for change just as some ideas, and there are many, many more. Of course, dropping our ego, right? Because we want everyone to be vegan immediately all the time. That's not going to happen, and that's going to keep us running in place. As I said before, no debunking for slam dunking. We're going to educate to uplift one another. That's why we learn these things. Embrace authentic allyship, which looks like organizing with social and environmental justice groups and showing up and supporting initiatives not directly rooted in animal justice, showing up just because we wholeheartedly believe and need to be there. Lastly, on my list anyway, liberatory language, mindful language for common ground. I gave an example that is actually real life for me. So someone said, you can't be a feminist and consume dairy products that exploit the female reproductive system, which was quite off-putting for this group to receive. It's not wrong necessarily, but I instead got a chance to speak to these folks, and I said, I find it important to advocate for the bodily autonomy of all beings, and it just really seemed to resonate. So I took that cue, and I've been so mindful of my language ever since. Onward. So our call to action. We're together in resistance, right? Unified. Reiterating the importance of unity and our resistance against all forms of oppression, encouraging continuous learning, dialogue, and action, always, always. We are doing everything that we can at APEX, so you can get involved with us as your organization, foundation, or your home if you don't have one, and use what you've learned today to advocate for change at apexadvocacy.org. So before I stop sharing my screen, or before we stop the recording, I will say thank you to those who are here and who may not be able to join the Q&A. And thank you for listening, and thank you for showing up for such a critical conversation. I really appreciate your time. And with that, we will stop the recording here.